The jailers can't sell them drugs. Where do you think these people in jail get their drugs? It's sold to them by the jailers. And you have to give them job training. And you have to allow them to move to different places so that they don't end up with the same gangs and communities. Can you imagine how many trillions of dollars that would cost? Well spent. But you have to bring troops home and worry about this country at least as much as we worry. I'm not talking about isolationism, I'm talking about realistic foreign policy. You can't help people who won't help themselves. How about that Iraqi army that we spend so much money training? You know who the main generals of ISIS, you know who they are?
Probably the ones who trained.
Saddam's people.
It was Saddam's generals. Now, why aren't they the generals of the Iraqi army?
Because they made an effort to keep them out.
The American occupation forces threw them out and put them in jail. And they're the ones that escaped jail. I remember they had that card, you know, they were the ace of spades and etc. These generals should have been kept in the new Iraqi army. They weren't allowed to be in the Iraqi army. So they went to, eventually, to places like ISIS. Did you know that? Did you know that the main generals are the former Saddam Hussein generals? So that should tell you something about how much we should fear them. They weren't so good to begin with, but they sure as hell better than what the Iraqi army is now. This was, by the way, just for your information, was the origin of the feminist movement in the world. Starting in the United States after World War II. A woman who graduated from one of the top women's colleges, I think it was Radcliffe, which is, in those days was the women's version of like Harvard. They didn't let women into Harvard in those days. It was in the late 1940s. She was the top student in her graduating class, all A's, right? Studying French literature, and political philosophy. So she marries a lawyer and moves to the suburbs and spends the next 10 years of her life, from 6 in the morning until 10 at night, taking care of all these little kids, deciding on which cartoon to watch. That was a major decision of the day. So she got so pissed off that she wrote a book about the experience of all these talented women who had to stay home while their husbands were in exciting jobs, just wasting their intelligence and their education. It cost millions of dollars. What was her? The book was called The Feminine Mystique. What was her name?
Ready for them.
Ready for Them. That became the beginning of the feminist movement in the United States.
The 1800s.
Huh?
The 1800s?
No, this is after World War II. If you ever want to read it, see, this is the Betty Friedan, F-R-I-E-D-A-N. Yeah, Betty Friedan. The Feminine Mystique.
Where's she from originally?
She was from the New York area. She lived in the New York suburbs and went to the famous women's college in Massachusetts. So it's a problem that women have, and it's really unsolvable. They want to have babies, they want to have families, they also want to have careers. So the feminist movement, who are ideologues, tell women you can have it all. In other words, they can be what? What's the word you used today? You could have it all. What is that mentality called? A megalomaniac. And it drives women's lives. Because nobody can have it all. Whether you want to defeat the world or you want to do everything that men and women can do, give birth, be great mothers. So they come up with all, in order to maintain that ideology, they come up with all kinds of words like quality time. It's all right if I just spend 15 minutes, as long as it's an intensive 15 minutes. Life is very, very difficult. well, in foreign policy and political leadership and being a good mother and father. And that's what libertarians and all ideologues who have one solution to every problem don't understand.
I have a question. I remember when we took the presidential leadership class with you, you talked about a couple of different decisions made by a couple of different leaders that I'd like to hear you recomment on. And one of them is the Feingold-McCain Act, because we talked a little bit about McCain because he was still, you know, a player then. And
What do you mean by player?
well, I mean, people were still talking about Sarah Palin and, you know, him having chosen her as the running mate.
This was long before.
Right.
The McCain-Feingold Act was long before that. It's
But it
very
was,
interesting.
you
It's very
highlighted that as
interesting.
one
So
of
he
his
was-
good things that
so
he tried to do,
he
but
came-
failed.
Bye, guys.
Yeah, he
How are
came,
you?
nice to meet you. He came to the attention of the American people because he was one of these prisoners of war in Vietnam, and Hanoi helped him. He got tortured virtually to death.
Right.
People in Mobile could appreciate it, especially because the leader of them became the senator from Alabama. What was his name?
Jeremiah Denton.
Yeah. His boss, in other words, the senior officer. And McCain was one of them. So they just knocked his head against the wall. I mean, it's just terrible torture, but he made it. Comes back as a hero and parlays that into becoming a senator. He gets involved with, during the Reagan administration, with one of these bankers in Arizona who was a con man. When Roosevelt, during the New Deal, wanted to solve one of the main problems with hard-working people, instead of putting their hard-earned savings in their mattress, putting it in banks. All these banks went out of business, taking all these people's hard-won savings with them. These are hard-working, decent people who went out of business, and their futures were just gone. So he passed an act which set up the insuring the FDIC. That's one of the features of the New Deal. But in an attempt to avoid bankrupting the federal government, they only would insure